All right, y'all. So 8.6. Let me let one in real quick. So 8.6 deals with polynomial inequalities. And we'll be writing our answers in interval notation again. So remember, for interval notation, if it's greater than or equal or less than or equal, you got to use brackets. And if it's greater than or less than, you got to use parentheses. Because remember, inequalities are your less than, greater than, and all that fun stuff, okay? So I'm going to write my steps to solving. All right, so we're dealing with quadratic inequalities. So first thing you want to do is solve for the variable. Now, once I solve for the variable, I'm going to set up a number line. Using these solutions. All right, so most of these are going to give us two solutions. So we'll set up our number line using them two solutions. Then what I do, I use a test point to determine where to shade the number line. All right, y'all, let me let some in real quick. All right, so I'll use a test point to determine where I shade the number line. Now, you got two things that can happen. So say A and B were my solutions. The first situation that could happen, we would shade in between A and B. So in interval notation, that'll give me something like the interval between A and B. Now remember, that could be brackets if I got equals in that, okay? Y'all, the second situation is it shades on the outsides. If our number line shades on the outsides, then our intervals will be from negative infinity to the first number, union from the second number to positive infinity. So I use a test point. Tell me where I shade this number line, because y'all, it's like this. If it shades in the middle, it's not going to shade on the ends. If it shades on the left end, it'll shade on the right end, and it will not shade in the middle. So you're going to have two of these situations, okay? So once we figure out where we're shading that number line, we write the answer. In interval notation. Now, a new symbol we're going to use. If the polynomial does not factor, then we get a no solution. And y'all, for this section, for no solutions, MATLAB is going to use a 0 with a line through it. So they'll have that symbol on the MATLAB for you to use, okay? Alrighty, y'all, so let's start playing with some of these. So these examples will say, solve the following inequality. All right, y'all, so number one, they got x minus 2 times x plus 3 is less than 0. So this one's basically already factored. So since it's already factored, I'm going to set each of these factors equal to 0 and solve both of them. Once I solve these, I'll have my two solutions to start with. So y'all, the first one, I add 2 to both sides. I get x equals 2. Second one, we'll subtract 3 from both sides. Then we'll get x is a negative 3. So now I set up my number line. And let's see, negative 3 will be first. And then 2. So I'm just putting them in order from left to right. So now I need to pick a test point. And I always like to use 0 because it's easiest to plug in. And if you noticed, 0 is going to be in between that negative 3 and 2, okay? So I'm going to test 0 in this equation and see if it's true. If it's true, I'm going to shade where the 0 was located. If I get a false, then I will shade the outside areas where the 0 is not located, okay? So we're going to test 0 by putting a 0 in. So I got 0 minus 2 times 0 plus 3. That has to be less than 0. All right, y'all, so this gives me negative 2 on the first parentheses. Second parentheses, 0 plus 3 is 3. So now finally multiplying negative 2 and 3, give me a negative 6, less than 0. All right, so I had negative 3 over here and 2 over here. Negative 6 less than 0, that is true. So since that was true, when I tested 0, and 0 was in between negative 3 and 2, I actually come in and shade it in between that negative 3 and 2. Now, if you pick any numbers over here that's not shaded and plug them in, that'll make that false, okay? So I've got my interval. Notice there's no equals, so this will be parentheses from negative 3 to 2, those parentheses. So y'all, it's not that bad. You just got to find you a test point, see where you shade it. Once you get it shaded, write that as an interval and be done. All right, let's try this one. So, and y'all, that's the only one they're going to have factored for you is that number 1. The rest of these, you're going to have to figure out how to factor. So I got an x squared minus 14x plus 33 is going to be greater than 0. So we got to factor this one. So we got an x squared. So that'll be an x and an x. The last number's positive. So since that last number's positive, both of these factors will have the same sign as the middle. So both of these will be negative. So now I need to find factors of 33 that'll add to get 14. So y'all, let's see. 33 could be 1 times 33. And then 3 times 11. That's the only 2 ways to get 33. And look at that. The ones that add to 14 are 3 and 11. So I would put in my 3 and my 11. So now I'm at this point. So set both these factors equal to 0. And solve. So y'all, the first one will add 3. Get x is a positive 3. Second one, I'll add 11. And I get x is a positive 11. So notice my number line. So 3 would be first, and then 11. Now, I'm still going to test 0, but notice when I test my 0, it's going to be in the first section because 0 is less than 3, okay? So I'm going to test 0. If it's true, I'm going to shade the first section and the last section. If it's false, then I'm only going to shade the middle. So remember, it's either shade, not shade, shade, or it's shade the middle, and that's it, okay? So let's put a 0 into this original equation. So I got 0 squared minus 14 times 0 plus 33 has to be greater than 0. You know the reason I like zeros? Because that's gone. That's gone. All that's left is 33 greater than 0. That is true. So 33 is greater than 0. So on my number line, since it was true where the 0 was, I'm going to shade the first section. And remember, since I shaded the first section, I got to shade the last section. All right, I'm still using parentheses because there's no equals under this. So writing this in interval notation, we're going to start at negative infinity until we hit positive 3. And then union from the positive 11 to the positive infinity. So y'all, they're not too bad. You just gotta find you a test point and see what happens on that interval, okay? So any questions yet? All right, y'all, moving on then. All right, y'all, 3 has x squared minus 4x minus 18 is greater than or equal to an x minus 4. So notice this one has a little bit more work because I need a 0 on this side over here. If I'm going to factor, I got to have me a 0 over here, remember? So what I need to do, I need to subtract the x from both sides. And I need to add a 4 to both sides. So we're going to move that x by subtracting x from both sides. We're going to move that -4 by adding a 4 to both sides. So y'all, let's see what we got. We got our x squared. -4, -1, give me -5x. Minus 14 and 4, a -14, +4, give me -14, greater than or equal to 0. So now we got our 0 there. So now we're going to come in and factor this. So the x squared is an x and an x. This time the last number is negative. Since the last number is negative, you're going to have one positive factor, one negative factor. And then we need to find factors of 14. So we got 1 and 14, 2 and 7. So since the last number is negative, I want two numbers that'll subtract to get a 5. That's going to be 7 and 2. The larger of these two numbers will be negative like the middle. So since the 7 is larger, it'll be negative like the middle. And then the 2 will be positive. You know, if you add that, 2 and -7 give you -5. 2 times -7 gives me -14. All right, so we're factored. Now solve it. All right, so the first one, I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. I get x is a -2. Second one, I'll add 7 and get x is a +7. So I'm going to set up my number line now. I got a -2 on this side, 7 on the right side. And I'm going to test my 0 again. 0 is going to be in between -2 and 7. So if it's true, I'm shading the middle. If it's false, I'm shading the outsides. And y'all, I'm going to use this equation right here that's already solved, okay? So I'm going to use my 0. So I'm going to have a 0 squared minus 5 times 0 minus 14 has to be greater than or equal to 0. We all, once again, the 0 squared is gone. 5 times 0 is gone. So all we got is a -14 greater than or equal to 0. Notice, this is false. So since that's false, I cannot shade where that 0 was. So what that means, since I cannot shade where the 0 is, I've got to shade the outside on both ends. All righty, y'all. Now be careful. This one does have an equals in it. So we got to use brackets around the numbers. So negative infinity will still use parentheses, but y'all, that -2 has to have a bracket. And then we'll union that from the 7 in a bracket to positive infinity. So y'all, they're not too bad. You just got to sort of, the trick is going to get them factored here, okay? All right, watch this one. X squared is greater than 16. So when I got an x squared and a number, and I don't have these x terms in the middle, fastest way to solve this, square roots. So y'all, let's see what we get. Square root of x squared greater than the square root of 16. That means x is going to be greater. Now remember, I need two answers out of this. So when we do square roots from now on, we need to account for the positive and negative. What's that? Square root of 16 is 4. So you got to use the plus and minus 4 for this answer because you need two answers, okay? Now you also negative 4 here, positive 4 there. And once again, I'm going to test 0. So I'm just going to put a 0 in for that x. That's going to give me 0 squared greater than 16. Well, 0 squared is 0. And 0 greater than 16 is false. Since that's false, I cannot shade where the 0 was located, so I'm going to have to shade the outsides. So remember, true, I would have shaded it. False, I got to shade the outsides. All righty, now there's no equals under this, so everything's using parentheses. So from negative infinity to that negative 4, union from the positive 4 to the positive infinity. All righty, y'all, let's see. We got number 5 coming up. $225 minus x squared is less than or equal to 0. All right, so this one I'm going to get my x squared on the left side. So I'm going to subtract 225 from both sides. So y'all, that brings down my negative x squared less than or equal to a negative 225. Now I want this to be a positive x squared, so I'm going to divide both sides by that negative 1. And y'all, I'm dividing by negative, so what do I need to do?
Flip the less than sign to greater than.
There you go. So remember, when I divide by negatives, flip that around so that we get a x squared greater than or equal to 225. So now we can take our square roots. And y'all, let's see, we get x greater than or equal to a plus or minus 15, okay? So, yeah, just remember, at this point, you want to flip it when you divide by that negative. All right, so my two numbers are going to be negative 15, positive 15, which means 0's right in between them again. All righty, so let's see. I'm going to go to this one where I got the x squared greater than or equal to 25. But y'all, you can use any of your equations, okay? I like this one. So I'm going to do 0 squared has to be greater than or equal to 225. Well, that's giving me 0 greater than or equal to 225. That's going to be false. So y'all let me ask you this. Since it's false when I tested at 0, where would you shade this? In the middle or on the outsides?
The outside.
The outsides, good job. Oh, and look at this, we got an equal. So remember, the numbers have to have brackets on them. So we start at our negative infinity to what, negative 15 with a bracket, and then union from 15 to our positive infinity. All right, let me see what they got here. They got a 14x minus 49 minus x squared is all less than 0. So I think the first thing I would do is put this in the right order. So I'm going to move this negative x squared to the front. Then I got the positive 14x minus the 49 less than 0. And y'all remember, we want that x squared positive. So we're going to come in and divide everybody by -1. Which means, once again, I got to reverse this and make that a greater than. You know, all that -1 doing is changing all the signs. Negative divided by negative makes that a positive x squared minus 14x plus 49 will now be greater than 0. All right, so now we get to factor because we got that x term in here. X squared is an x and an x. Remember, the last sign's positive. Since the last sign's positive, both of these factors will have the same sign as the middle, so they'll both be negative. And y'all, let's see, we need some factors of 49. So that'll be 1 and 49. And then, 7 and 7. And I need a pair to add to get 14, which will be the 7 and 7. But y'all look at this. I've got repeating factors. So I'm only going to set one of the factors equal to 0. And you'll notice something happening on this one. So we'll solve that by what? Adding 7. And I get x equals 7. When you only have one number here, that's the only number we get to exclude from the domain. So that's the only number that we exclude from the domain. So y'all, if that's the only number I exclude from the domain, my domain will be from negative infinity to that number 7, union from that 7 to positive infinity. All right, so be careful on 6. You're probably going to get a single number like me. So when we get a single number, that's the only number we can exclude from our domain, okay? All right, y'all, the last one here has a x squared plus 22 less than 8x. So remember, I need a 0 here, so I'm going to move the 8x to the other side by subtracting 8x. And I'm just sort of putting it in the middle because that's where it's about to go, right? I'm going to bring down my x squared. Then I'll put that negative 8x. Then I got my 22. All that is now less than 0. Alrighty, y'all, so let's try to factor this. So x squared is an x and an x. The last sign's positive. So both of these factors will be negative like the middle number. And let's see, we got to play with 22. So I got 1 and 22. What else I got? 2 and 11. But I need a pair of factors that add to get 8. Well, y'all, that's adding to get 23. That adds to get 13. Those are the only factors of 22. That means this does not factor. Because I don't have any factors of 22 that'll add to get me that 8. So since it does not factor, remember this is a no solution. And in MATLAB, for no solution, you're going to use that circle with a line through it. So remember, that means no solution. All right, y'all, that was 8.6. So now I was going to look at some of these 8.6 support questions. And it only has 4 in it, okay? And these were getting you ready for these equations that we just solved. So like my first one, I got 11x plus 5. And then I got a 6x minus 18 equal to 0. Well, y'all, this was getting you ready for my very first problem. Already factored equal to 0. So you come in and set both of your factors to 0. And solve them for the variable. So y'all will subtract 5 on our first one. I get 11x equals negative 5. Come in, divide both sides by 11. So that cancels, giving me 1x. Oh, we can't do nothing with that, so we'll keep that a negative 5 over 11. Now this one, we're going to add 18. That's going to give me my 6x equals that positive 18. Come in and divide by 6. So that cancels, giving me my 1x again. And then this time 18 divided by 6 will give me 3. So remember, that was just getting you ready for what I did today. The second one we had to factor was a w squared minus 4w minus 32 equal to 0. All right, so let's see what we got. W squared is a w and a w. The last sign is negative on the 32. So since that 32 is negative, we got unlike signs. Now I do know the larger of my factors will be negative like the middle. So what I got to do is find factors of 32. So let me bring 32 right here. So that'll be 1 and 32, 2 and 16, 4 and 8. And y'all, I think that's it, right? So one pair of these will subtract and give me that 4. And that's going to be the 4 and the 8. So remember, when the last sign's negative, you want your factors to subtract to get to that middle number. Now remember, the larger factor is the same sign as the middle, so the 8 has to be negative. The 4 has to be positive. All right, and at that point, set these equal to 0 and solve. So y'all, the first one, we'll subtract 4 from both sides and get W is a negative 4. The second one, I'll add 8 to both sides and get W is a positive 8.
How will we write these in?
Oh, they'll probably have well, let me go pull it up real quick. They should just have like X equals, and then you put in the two numbers, I would think, but let me go make sure. I'm doing what, 8.6 support. All right, so like this one was using R's or W, so that's W like I just did. So over here, they got the solution is R, W equals. All you do is put the two numbers with a comma.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you got to watch them because sometimes they'll want the whole thing. So. All righty, 2m squared minus 7m minus 22 equals 0. Oh, y'all, let me pull my calculator up real quick. Let me get it loaded up. All right, so let me share my calculator real quick. These ones, when you got a number in front, are trickier to solve. Now, this was a 2m squared minus 7m minus 22, but I'm going to graph it using x's. So I'm going to do 2x squared minus 7x minus 22. Because if you remember, watch what happens when I graph this. Y'all see, I can almost tell where it's crossing that x-axis at. So I can tell the first one's at -2. Now the second one, let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that second one is at 5.5, right? So 5 1/2, which would be what, 11/2. If you're weak at factoring, that's one way you can do it. Now I'm going to show you by hand how I do these. So remember, my calculator said -2, and then that other one was 11/2. Because I just made that 5.5 into an improper fraction. But y'all, when you're weak at factoring, you can also do the quadratic formula. So let's plug in -b, which is -7, plus or minus square root b squared will be -7 squared minus 4 times a is 2, and c is a -22 all over 2 times a, which is 2. Now, quad formula takes a little more time, but it'll give me my two answers. And they should be something similar to that, okay? Well, here we go. Double negative on the 7 makes that a positive 7. Underneath here, negative 7 squared is a positive 49. Now we're multiplying the whole right side here. So let's see, 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 22 is 176. And you got two negatives, so that's going to make that a positive. All of that over 2 times 2 is 4. All right, y'all, so here we go. We're working underneath the radical. So 176 and 49 under there. Give me 225. All over 4. All right, square root of 225 is 15. All over 4. So now using this, I can get my two answers. My first answer, I'm going to do 7 plus 15 divided by 4. To get the second answer, I'm going to do 7 minus 15 over 4. All right, y'all, 7 and 15 is 22 divided by 4. And y'all, guess what? 22 divided by 4 will reduce by taking out the 2's to a 11 over 2. Well, that's the same thing the graph gave me. And my second answer, 7 minus 15 is negative 8 over 4, which gives me a negative 2. So notice, quadratic formula will give you the same two answers as graphing that did, okay? So either way. All right, y'all, then the last one was sort of getting you ready for the square root stuff. So they got a 5x squared minus 10 equals 0. So remember, I'm going to get this x squared over here by itself. So I'm going to add 10. I get 5x squared. That cancels. 0 plus 10 will give me 10. Divide by 5 first. So notice what I get. I get my x squared over here. 10 divided by 5 gives me 2. And then y'all square root it. So that's going to give you x. Now remember, this needs to be a plus and a minus. And y'all, we really can't do nothing with that square root of 2. So we're going to leave that a plus or minus square root of 2. So these 4 support questions were just to get you ready for those quadratic stuff in 8.6.
Can you go over the calculator one again?
On how I was solving that?
With the calculator?
Uh-huh. Now, I don't really use it for these kind right here because square roots, it's hard to tell what that is on a calculator. But when I got a trinomial like this and it has a number in the very front, I like to use that calculator. So let me go grab it. And then I was at y equals. So the main thing you got to remember when you're using the calculator, although they gave us m's, we got to use x's on it. So I did my 2x squared minus my 7x and then minus the 22. So remember, we're trying to solve equations. So remember, x-intercepts are the same as the solutions for these quadratics, okay? So I said, well, let me graph this. So if you notice, if you go to the table, you'll see this one. You won't see this one in the table yet. But watch this. If I go to second graph into my table. Woo, let me get back up there where that -2 was at. Because you're looking for zeros on these. You want y values that equal 0. So look at that. At -2, I got a y value of 0. Now, the other one was sort of tricky to tell where that was at. But since you had a 2 in the very front of this equation, that means they're going to break it down into halves. So I just started at the center and I was just trying to count how far right I went. So I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's in between the 5 and the 6. So that's where I came up with the 5.5 at. Alrighty, so yeah, usually when you got a number in the front of those equations, and y'all, I'll show y'all another way to do these. So let me write that problem down real quick. Now, I'll show you the way I do these by factoring. It's really similar to factoring, but it's got another step or two to it. So watch this. So when you got a number in the front, you multiply that number times the last number. So 2 times 22 equals 44. Now watch this. I'm going to start out my parentheses. M squared is going to put an M here and an M here. Last one's negative, remember, so one will be positive, one will be negative. So here's where the trick comes in. I need factors of 44 that'll subtract and get me 7. So let me play with that 44. So 1 and 44 don't work. 2 and 22 don't work. Let's try what's next. 4 and 11. And I think that's all, but look here. 4 and 11 give me that -7, right? So what I do, the larger factor still has the same sign as the middle. So the 11 will be negative and the 4 will be positive. Now here's the only difference. Since I borrowed that 2 and multiplied by the last number, once you got your two numbers, you got to divide that number out again. So you borrow the 2, get the 44, find factors of 44, that'll give you that 7. Once you got your two factors, then you got to divide by the 2 again that you borrowed. So look what I get. M plus 4 divided by 2 is 2. All right, M minus 11 halves. Can't do nothing with that at the moment. So set both these factors equal to 0. And y'all solve it. Watch this. We'll subtract 2. There's our -2 again. And here, all we can do is add 11 halves. But guess what? I get M equals a positive 11 halves. So did you notice three ways you can do this. This is the factor way. You can use the quadratic formula, or you can graph it. I like this way, but you just got to get used to multiplying by the first number to get that 44 and then dividing that first number back out, okay? All right, y'all, any questions?
If I give you a problem, can you show me how to graph it? Because every time I do it, I get the second number right, but the fraction number, I can't.
So what's the number?
3n squared plus 10 plus 8 equals 0.
So 3n squared plus 10n plus 8 equals 0.
Yes.
All righty. Now the trick on that one, I'll show you the trick on that one. Because that one's got a 3 in the front. So watch what I do. So I'm going to use x's again. Remember, 3x squared plus 10x plus 8. So let's go look at that graph. Now, I will say this, since that's got a 3 in the front, we need to think about this being in thirds versus halves like I had, okay? So I'm gonna
Okay.
Ooh, that gave me two. I'm gonna have to see if I can zoom that in a little bit. Let me see. Zoom in number 2. All right, let me go to my table and try to get one of them numbers. So I know I'm on the negative side here. So I know one of them's -2 for sure. Right? Because that -2 got that 0 there. And that looks like this one over here. Because if this is going by ones, that'd be -1 and then -2 over here. So what we got to figure out, if the left side's at -2, this thing is going to go by thirds. So you see where my cursor is? That'll be a third. And then if you went over about right here, would be another third. So we're at -1 and 1/3. So let me show you a trick. You see where it says table set above window right there?
Yes.
I'm going to hit second window. Now, where it has, where I'm blinking at now, that little triangle table, that means how do you want your table to change? Well, yours is going, you got a 3 in the front, so we're going to make this a 1/3. Now, if I set it at 1/3, I'm going to go graph it again, but I'm going to show you the table now. Because the table is going to make everything go by thirds. And you see your 0 is still at -2. But if you come down, your other 0 is at -1.333, which is basically a -1 and 1/3. So yeah, just remember, go back and set that table back. Come back down here and make that go by ones again when you're done. And then let me see if my table is back to that and back by ones. Yeah, because you're dealing with fractions. So let me show you. So this
Can
is
you put in a mixed number on MATLAB?
well, when you get that -1 and 1/3, turn it into a -4/3. So remember, 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4/3. But that graphing's sort of tricky. Let me show you my little trick I did a while ago. Watch this. 3 times 8 is 24. So I'm going to set up my parentheses. N squared is an N and an N. Yours is positive at the end, so both factors will be positive like the middle. So I need factors of 24. That'll add and get me a 10. So let's see. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. So the ones that add to get 10 are going to be 4 and 6. But remember, I got to divide both them by that number I borrowed, which is the 3. So let's see what I get. Can't do nothing with that at the moment, so that's going to stay 4/3. But look at this one. 6 divided by 3 makes that a 2. So now just set both of these equal to 0. Subtract 4/3 on that one. So that's that negative 1 and 1/3 one we got. And then this, when we subtract 2, you get n as a negative 2. So that'll be your other one. Yeah, the graphing, you just got to be tricky because if you got a 3 in here, you got to think of the interval being in thirds. Mine had that 2 up here. So I had to think of mine being in halves on it. But I like doing this what I just showed y'all. Because all you're doing is borrowing the 3 for a moment, then you divide it back out and get your answers. Alrighty, so let me see. Tomorrow we'll review for test 3.